ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Walk Show podcast. This is your host, Walker Neer. Up front, I'd like to mention you can follow me on Twitter at the Walk Show Pod, Instagram and Facebook at the Walk Show. And if you like the show, please take a moment and like, rate, subscribe. Whatever your app lets you do, it helps the show become more discoverable. And I also ask that you just tell a friend if you enjoy the show, because it certainly helps to grow the audience by having a recommendation from a trusted friend like that. So really appreciate that. I also would like to shout out my other podcast. I'm sure that you get done listening to this and you just think to yourself, I wish I could listen to even more Walker. Well, luckily you can, and that is on the podcast Pick Up Your Sticks. Pick Up Your Sticks is a gaming podcast that I host with my friend Brett Lindley. As opposed to just doing news and reviews and current events in gaming, Brett and I really try and talk about why gaming matters. So we certainly talk about current events and current games and things like that, but we also try and just explore why games matter to us and the effects that it's had on our lives, sometimes just for entertainment, but sometimes in more profound ways. So if you enjoy the kind of long-form conversations we have here on the Walk Show, then I definitely invite you to check out Pick Up Your Sticks. I think it'll be right up your alley. Finally, I want to mention Ozarks Food Harvest. Ozarks Food Harvest is a food bank here in Southwest Missouri that helps provide meals to needy families. It's an excellent organization that's very, very efficient. I cannot suggest enough that you, if you're in the Southwest Missouri area, volunteer or donate at Ozarks Food Harvest if you can, because it's a really great cause and, again, a really great organization. If you're not in Southwest Missouri, then I really recommend that you try and find your local food bank and see how you can help out there. Hunger is a very real problem and something that we can actively try and solve. We just have to get involved to do so. Today's episode is a little all over the place. I open up talking about the new Witcher TV show and some other shows that I have liked and not liked in the past, just to kind of give some context. And then finally, I kind of conclude by talking about some stories with my dad and myself and the baseball card collecting that we used to do when I was a kid, and specifically this card shop that I went to. As always, the music's provided by Misha Zarin, so thank you for that, Misha. And without further ado, let's get on to the show. Hola, amigos. So I recently watched a show that's come out, I don't know, in the last 2 months on Netflix called The Witcher. For those of you who are not familiar, The Witcher is currently a really popular video game series, actually, which is how I am familiar with it. But it actually is truly based, the video games and now subsequently the show, off of a series of books from this Polish author. But yeah, I've never read the books. I have played the Witcher games, although I don't think I've ever beat one of them, so, don't know all of the story from the games. But the TV show that just came out on Netflix is set well before the events of the games, from what I understand. Which makes sense, because it kind of shows the origin of one of the primary characters, and in the games, that character is already established. But yeah, so I just kind of wanted to share some of my thoughts on The Witcher. I thought that it was actually a really great show. It's only 8 episodes, which I'm a fan of. And I will say, a complaint I have about other shows is they're too long. And really, in fairness, if let's say The Witcher gets 10 seasons and then I try and jump in, well, that's an enormous amount of content. Whereas, consuming it as it comes out obviously helps with that. The Witcher is, a fantasy show where there's monsters and magic and swords and that kind of stuff. So if that's not your cup of tea, then probably the show's not for you, because all of that stuff is heavily present in each show. I personally am a pretty big fantasy nerd. Love the Lord of the Rings movies. Love fantasy type video games that are that setting, that kind of medieval, magical setting. And yeah, The Witcher provides a really interesting story in that framework, I think. the way that, and I think this is the primary complaint about the show, at least from what I've read other people talking about online, is kind of just the way that the story is told through the show is kind of confusing. There's basically, there's more than two, but there's multiple timelines that are all being shown to you, but as the viewer, it's not really clear that there are multiple timelines, except when they present you with something very obvious. So, not much of a spoiler because this happens in the first episode, but I won't even say who, but there's a character that dies in the first episode, and then I think it's like the fourth episode. The fourth episode is largely based around that character. So it's clear that the events in the fourth episode must have happened prior to the events in the first episode, right? Because after the end of the first episode, the character's dead. And so again, at no point does it have on the screen like 10 years earlier than the events from the first episode, or I don't know how they would say it, but something like that. There's just no indication, and the characters all look identical. Some of them are, magicians or mages, and then like the Witcher himself is like a mutant. That's the name of the main character, is the Witcher, or what his type or role in society is called. His name's actually Geralt, but yeah, they all look the same, and you could attribute that to the lore of the Witcher and the mages. They don't age because they can control that to some extent, or at least control their appearance, right? So okay, fine, but there are other characters that aren't special in any way. That, like the character who dies in the first episode and then is again present in the fourth episode. That character the fourth episode has to take place like 30 years or something prior to the events of the first episode. I don't know that it's that long. I guess actually it must be closer to like 12 years or something. But either way, it's a long time, and the character that I keep referencing that's dead in the first episode and comes back is not clearly 12 years older or younger, in whatever episode you're looking at. So it's just kind of confusing as to what's going on, and it's not obvious until literally the very end of the last episode of the season that all the timelines kind of converge and everything gets caught up to itself, and it's like, oh, okay. Now, it's clear. And the reason I go into such detail about sharing that is that another friend of mine actually explained to me that the timeline part was kind of confusing. And so it helped me to be aware of that. So I was looking out for it and looking for clues and indications as to where things might fit. Even with that warning, I still didn't fully grasp it all until the end. But yeah, it's good, I think, to kind of have that knowledge just going in. That just be aware that the timeline's a little confusing. But other than that, the show's, it's pretty cool, and it's a unique kind of take on the fantasy world. Fantasy worlds so often revolve around hero type characters, and The Witcher is certainly that to some extent. But he's not trying to save the world from some grand evil. Like in Lord of the Rings, Sauron is, the all-seeing eye or whatever, is trying to rule and dominate the world. But it's not really clear why, other than he's just compelled to do so and is evil. There's not really a lot of strong backing for such a premise. It just kind of is what it is. It's kind of like, a very light interpretation or understanding of like the devil or Satan type character, where it's like he just exists to be evil for the sake of that, but without any obvious benefit or gain to himself. Sauron in Lord of the Rings is kind of that. It's just this ever-present evil that exists to destroy all things without really providing a lot of context why, or at least not that I'm aware of. Like in the Avengers movies, for example, Thanos is certainly the villain, and obviously wiping out half of the population is a pretty scary thing and a horrible thing, but at least he has some goal in mind. Even though it's sick, even though it's demented, even though it no way justifies what he's doing, it at least I don't know, to me at least, it makes it a little more relatable that in his mind he's trying to accomplish something, right? And again, the ends don't justify the means. What he's trying to accomplish is horrible and wrong, but at least there's a rationale to it, even if that rationale is crazy, as opposed to just, I like to be mean for the sake of that, which again, I just don't fully grasp. And so all of that is to say, again, The Witcher doesn't really position it that way. The Witcher is more about a character who is special and is kind of a hero type, but he's just kind of making his way through the world. And that's how the games very much are. Again, at least to the extent that I've played them, is there is no Sauron ever that you're trying to stop. And you might be in, the Witcher character, the Geralt, he might be involved in political intrigue, but again, all of the people in the political intrigue still have their own motivations. So it still, matters a little bit more, I think. And again, at least is more believable. Game of Thrones, probably the most popular fantasy TV show ever, kind of blends the line between the idea of the big overarching evil versus, just political intrigue. Because in that you have the political intrigue of all the kingdoms, but then simultaneous to that, you have the whole White Walker thing and Khaleesi with the dragons, and all of that is independent really of what's going on in Westeros. I mean, obviously, again, it all kind of comes together eventually, but the large majority of that show is really about the political intrigue, which I, having read those books, thought that was really what attracted me to them initially. Was I liked that even though the Lannisters are arguably evil and malevolent people, at least there's a rationalization to it that you can understand, even if you disagree with it, even if you don't think it's relatable in the sense that you wouldn't take the same actions they would to get what they want. At least it makes sense that they're coming from a place, as opposed to just cruelty for the sake of cruelty with no end result, no outcome. And so I think The Witcher, kind of falls in line a little more with that. There's not nearly as many characters as there are in Game of Thrones, and I don't even think politically it's quite that grand. But yeah, just some really neat ideas, some interesting monster types. They're kind of familiar from the games, but especially if you've never played the games or read the books or anything, it's a pretty interesting dive to go into and kind of explore that world. And yeah, it just works a lot differently than a lot of other fantasy content that I've consumed. It also has, I think, a pretty good soundtrack. The music is a lot of very heavily vocally emphasized, which I think is really cool. All in all, I'd say that The Witcher, again, definitely worth a watch if you can get into supernatural, fantastical kind of stuff at all. Again, I think the length of it is excellent. It doesn't take too long. I mean, I finished it within, I think, a week. So it's not a huge time investment. And it's something that, I think I watched the last 4 episodes all in a row, which I'm hard-pressed to watch a long movie anymore because I'm just, what will hold my attention for that long. And arguably, modern TV shows are like really, really long movies. And The Witcher is no different. It's just one really long storyline, right? But yeah, highly recommend checking out The Witcher on Netflix. The guy who plays The Witcher is Henry Cavill. I think that's how you say his name, but he played Superman in all the recent Superman movies and Justice League or whatever movies. And yeah, he does a really good job. I haven't really watched all the Superman movies start to finish. I've watched clips of him and stuff, and so I don't really have an impression of that guy from those movies. But I thought he was excellent as The Witcher. He was very believable as that character, and again, compared to the character in the games that I'm used to, did an awesome job of kind of delivering on that. Just to kind of provide some context for, what kind of TV shows I like, and I'm sure I've talked about a lot of these before already, but I'll just stick to one, actually. My favorite TV show of all time, I would say, is The Wire, which is a very popular pick, so that's not, I'm not a hipster with that or anything. The Wire is widely considered to be the best TV show that ever existed. And I think that it benefits from something. And I think that Game of Thrones benefited from this. I think The Witcher benefits from this. And I think The Wire benefits from this. And that is that the source material that they're based off of already exists. So, like, in The Wire, this is specifically true because The Wire's 5 seasons, and the show creator wrote all 5 seasons out before they started recording it, right? Before they filmed the show. Game of Thrones is a little different. The first 7 seasons or so, or I don't know about 7, first 5 seasons maybe are plotted out by the books. But I think that shows benefit from having something written out already because there's just a clear direction for the showrunners to go. Whereas when you don't have that, you get a show like Lost, which is also a very popular show. I get that. But I actually couldn't get through Lost. I think I got to about season 4. And then, no pun intended, but I was lost. I had no idea where they were trying to go with the show, what sense it made. And I don't think the show actually did make a lot of sense. And the ending kind of, proved that, because the ending of Lost didn't really explain anything. It just kind of provided more questions. But I think that's because it's either the first 2 or 3 seasons of Lost were written by one individual. I mean, I'm sure he had a team, but one individual, is credit for that. And then after that second or third season, it changes writers completely. Well, what then happens is that, they don't know exactly where that guy was going with it. I mean, I'm sure he provided notes and there was an idea, but it's not pre-planned out. And so then it just kind of has a chance, which I think Lost does, to become more and more convoluted. The Wire does an excellent job of kind of slowly expanding this world. So, like, you start out in the first season, and the whole show is centered around Baltimore, and really kind of drugs and corruption in Baltimore. I don't know, what the point of The Wire is supposed to be definitively, but I personally think, from watching it, that it really just kind of shows how corruption happens, and that corruption can exist in all areas of society, and that it exists for a wide variety of reasons. So, The Wire starts out in season 1, and it shows basically the drug dealers in the projects in Baltimore, and then some police officers that are tasked with trying to stop them, right, with dealing with these drug dealers. Then it goes to the second season. It kind of zooms out a little bit, and now it involves the shipping yards, because that's how the drugs are getting into Baltimore, is through the shipping, right? So there's a whole nother set of people involved in the drug dealing business from the shipping yards, which then also draws, more police or whatever, right? So you get more characters, and it kind of grows and expands. And then in the third season, it kind of fully fleshes out that whole environment with the Baltimore gangs, the police, and then the people at the shipping yards. And then in the fourth season, it kind of zooms out another level, and it actually shows you a school, and how the school is influenced by all of these other events, right? How the kids that live in these neighborhoods and live in these areas are impacted, and how the police interacting with these kids, what they're kind of seeing from it. And then in the fifth season, it actually adds a newspaper. And so now you get to see society from kind of this perspective of the media. And I actually should back up. I think I don't know if it's just in season 3. It might be in 1, 2, and 3, and really throughout the whole show. But it also involves politicians, and it starts out with just like the mayor, right? Because he cares about the city police and what they're doing. But he has higher aspirations. So then it goes into like the state senate and the governor and that sort of stuff. So you're really getting this picture of all these different walks of life and all of these different, institutions and individuals within them. And you get to see that all the different character types and all the different personality types, whether that be the honorable person, the dutiful person, the angry person, the crazy person, the violent person, all of the shady person who betrays everyone, like all of these character types exist in all of these different places. So it's not just the drug dealers that are bad, right? Because there's crooked cops. But it's not that all the cops are crooked, because there's some honest ones. But then you also get into the politicians. And not every politician is corrupt, but there are some corrupt ones. And there's also a lot of scenarios that you see play out where, you know, at point in time A, a person needs to get something done, so they go to another person and they get a favor, right? Hey, I'll do this if you'll help me out with this situation that I really need resolved. And that happens, and it's all normal seeming, right? Well, now later down the line, the person who helped out the first person in the scenario I just described, now they need the help. And so now they come back to that first person that they helped and go, hey, I hooked you up previously, now you owe me a favor, I need this. Well, unfortunately, that conflicts with something else that the original person is now dealing with. And so now, if you just look at it in a vacuum, it looks like this person who needed the favor and now is owing a favor is corrupt, because they're going to hook up this friend of theirs and kind of put to the side this new cause that they're working for. But it's not just because they're evil and they're not doing it for money or something like that. It's that society in the world to some extent is built on a system of people doing favors and doing things for one another. And so, not that all corruption is the result of that. Some of it is just plain downright, out and out corruption. But it also can be manifested out of people earnestly trying to help each other and trying to do the right thing and trying to stand by commitments and promises that they had made. So yeah, I don't know. The Wire is probably my favorite show of all time. And I go through that to explain it just so you have kind of some understanding of where I'm coming from with saying that I like The Witcher. So, if you're a fan of The Wire, then I think that you will probably find yourself a fan of The Witcher, even though they're very different shows with totally different characters, totally different settings, everything. But yeah, I thought The Wire was truly excellent, and again, I think The Witcher is pretty good as well. But then shows that I'm not a huge fan of would be like Breaking Bad, which is a very, very popular show. Some people are probably shutting the podcast off right now as I say that. But the reason that I didn't like Breaking Bad is that I found it to be formulaic. I found it to be a situation where Walter White is constantly faced with a new challenge, and that challenge isn't the right word. A new moral conundrum, a new line to cross, right? So initially, I think it's just killing someone and I don't mean that that's a trivial thing, but in the context of that show, it certainly is. So at first, it's like, well, can he kill someone? And then he does. And then the next time, he has to kill someone or do something that's even more extreme. And he hems and haws about it, and then finally he does it. And then the season ends, and then it goes to the next season, and now everything just continues to escalate, and he is constantly faced with, will he break bad or not, right? Which is, I get the name of the show and the premise, and maybe why people like it, because they like relating to, will an otherwise normal-seeming guy cross yet another line that he didn't think he would ever cross? I got it, again, for the first couple of seasons, but after, I think I got through season 4 maybe, and then I just had to bail, because it just felt formulaic. The Wire absolutely does not feel formulaic. There's way too many things changing. And I would say The Witcher doesn't feel formulaic at all either, because the episodes really jump around. Now, it also is only one season in, so it certainly could turn that way. But as of right now, I think it's, pretty top-notch. So I don't know that these stores really exist anymore, but when I was a kid, my dad had a buddy named John Anno, who I think has passed away at this point, but John Anno had worked with my dad at the warehouse that my dad worked at, and eventually he left and started a card shop. And when I say a card shop, I mean like a sports memorabilia, baseball card, all sports, but and then sold, autographed pictures and, again, just sports memorabilia type stuff. And these type of stores used to be, somewhat prevalent. But I don't know, with the advent of the internet and how popular e-commerce stuff is, I don't know how prevalent those type of shops are anymore. I would assume that they're bundled with comic stores and all sorts of those little niche stores that used to exist just on their own, probably condensed more into one now. But yeah, either way, so my dad and I would go to this card shop that John Anno owned pretty much every weekend. And it was super cool for me to have kind of that insider access where I can talk to the shop owner, and this guy just lives and breathes sports, I mean, that's his whole business. And so I could, could just share interesting anecdotes, and we could talk really about any sport thing you wanted to. And he was just a really, down-to-earth, nice guy. And he also was generous with my dad, and so you can buy packs of baseball cards, but you can also buy an entire box that's full of those packs. And so he would actually sell boxes of packs of cards to my dad at a discount. And then my dad and I would go home and unpack all the cards and sort them and organize them. And it was just, for a little kid, it was just a dream come true. Prior to that, the most packs I would ever get at one time was maybe, 2 or 3, again, at most. And here we are coming home with boxes that have 30 packs or 50 packs or, whatever the case may be. And it was just a dream come true. It was just a really fun ritual that my dad and I had together for I don't know, probably 2 to 3 years. I don't know exactly how long, but it was quite a while. It was only when he finally, in cards, they have rare cards, right, that are somewhat unique, and there's only a certain amount printed. And so it drives the value of them because they're collector's items, as opposed to the regular set cards that there are, hundreds of thousands or millions or however many they made of them. So we get an insert, is what they call these unique cards. We get an insert one time, and it's like a, 1 in, 50,000 chance or something to get this insert. So it's a pretty low chance that you'll find one of these cards, except that the player that we got on this insert that we found was Charles Barkley. And while Charles Barkley is a Hall of Famer and, certainly a popular player, his card, that card was not demanding a lot, right? People weren't super eager to collect that Charles Barkley card. Whereas if it had been like a Michael Jordan card or something, it's worth, at least according to the pricing guides, significantly more. But yeah, my dad was really mad that we got so lucky as to get such an insert, while simultaneously being so unlucky that we got a player where the insert is almost worthless. And that kind of really soured him on the experience, and that was kind of when we stopped going and buying cards like that. But we would still go to John Anno's shop and still go visit him. And yeah, John Anno is actually the person who put me on to my first kind of basketball idol, which was not Michael Jordan. It was Allen Iverson. I remember we went to Anno's shop, and he was asking us if we had heard of Allen Iverson yet, and because he was a rookie and I hadn't, and he explained that it's that Allen Iverson was insanely fast and had this killer crossover, and he was this really exciting player to watch. And so I started watching him and just immediately fell in love with the guy. Allen Iverson is to this day one of my favorite, basketball players. And yeah, it's just interesting because like just that one moment at John Anno's card shop spawned literally a lifetime of fandom for me for Allen Iverson. I don't know if I would have found Allen Iverson if I wouldn't have had that conversation. Eventually I would have, because eventually he became this big NBA superstar. But at that time, he was a rookie. I didn't have regular access to Sports Center. The internet was not, the modern internet, so it wasn't like I could just pop over to NBA.com and start watching all the highlights and see this rookie sensation. But I mean, eventually my dad got me an autographed picture of Allen Iverson that I still have hanging in my house today. He got me one of his buddies at work made wooden statues of athletes that he whittled out. He got me a whittled out wooden statue of Allen Iverson that I've still got. And then I also, because like I said, we were buying all these cards, started collecting Allen Iverson rookie cards, and still to this day have a book of the card sleeves that I would say has close to 30 Allen Iverson rookie cards. Now, I have no idea if there's any real value in those, but I don't really care because I'm not looking to sell them, right? If there's value to me in it. I remember my sister, and she got me Allen Iverson jersey to wear, and I wore that thing until it was worn out. But just was a really big Iverson fan, and it's interesting, I guess, just because that fandom was kind of born out of me being a kid, and while Allen Iverson is certainly deserving of fandom and has infinite fans, well, there was also a bit that it's not like I was looking at all 300 players in the NBA and then choosing him. I only knew about so many, but it kind of felt like something special that me and my dad and his friend all could enjoy or be aware of together. And that kind of made it more fun. So whenever he'd get a new rookie card in, maybe he'd save it for me, or again, the autograph picture, all of that stuff was just really cool. And then later in life, I became a huge Kobe Bryant fan. But that was a little different because that wasn't spawned through my dad and I, going to this card shop and this social interaction. It was more spawned just of my former roommate and I watching basketball and just kind of seeing Kobe in a different light, and watching some interviews with Kobe and seeing how he interacted with the media and just with other players and other people, and really kind of falling in love with his character. I mean, his play is certainly amazing, and I still will just sit and watch Kobe highlights once in a while. But it was more of almost, at least to start with, almost more of an intellectual attraction to the Kobe character and his play, but eventually turned into a more emotional connection where I just love that character and love to watch him play. Whereas with Iverson, there wasn't really a lot of intellectual consideration. I just kind of dove into it. Anyway, all of this just to say that I just wanted to share, I guess, because I really enjoy that fond memory of going to that card shop and talking with John Anno. And I have no idea if his family would ever hear this podcast, but if they did, that guy left a really strong and positive impression on my life and gave me a lot of really good memories to have, and was also the impetus for a lot of good memories that I had with just with my dad. And I think probably made me overall a larger basketball fan than I would have been otherwise, because I was so immersed in collecting the cards and then getting immersed with Allen Iverson and trying to follow his career. And while he was popular, again, he wasn't Michael Jordan, he wasn't Magic Johnson, he didn't have that level of popularity. So it was kind of fun to be an Allen Iverson fan, because not everyone was. Iverson is kind of credited with kind of really bringing the hip-hop culture to the NBA. And I've always been a huge fan of rap and hip-hop, so kind of getting to be a fan of his as that all unfolded was cool as well. But yeah, like I said, just a cool memory with that sports card shop, and kind of interesting how my fandom grew out of that. And yeah, just really appreciate those memories with my dad. that is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you again for listening, and thank you, Misha Zarins, for providing the music for the show. And again, if you guys are, have any thoughts or anything like that to share, even if you know me personally, instead of texting me or emailing me privately, I ask you to go on Twitter and again, tweet me there, or go on Instagram or Facebook and message me there, just so other people can kind of see the conversation as well, and maybe we can get some other folks engaged. As always, appreciate the listen. Have a good week.